Welcome to Resilient Inspirations. Around here, we believe every story carries a lesson and every question opens a new door. Think of this as friends talking over coffee, exploring ideas together. So let's get started, and I'll pass the mic to the conversation.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are examining the escalating crisis of identity debt. And to really understand the scale of this problem, I want you to imagine carrying a physical key ring. Every time you take on a new responsibility at your company or, a new project, a new job title, someone hands you a new key.
Right. And you just add it to the ring. But the crucial part here is that you never actually throw the old ones away.
Exactly. So after a decade at an organization, you are dragging around 50 pounds of jagged metal. You don't actually know what most of these keys open anymore, but you are terrified to throw any of them away because you might need one someday to do your job.
And anyone who steals that heavy, completely unmanageable key ring suddenly has unrestricted access to every single room you've ever walked through in your entire career.
Right. And this isn't just a metaphor. It is the defining vulnerability of our modern digital infrastructure. We're dealing with a phenomenon that spans both the structural integrity of our networks and really the psychological evolution of the leaders who build them. So the central question we are exploring today is this. As non-human identities explode in number and agent AI begins taking autonomous actions across our networks, how do we solve this crisis of identity debt? Must we adopt fully autonomous, self-learning identity systems to manage the chaos?
Or is the root of the problem fundamentally human? Meaning, does it require psychological subtraction and deliberate leadership discipline rather than just, throwing more technology at it?
Right. And we are drawing today on a comprehensive review of recent literature on identity governance, cybersecurity trend predictions for 2026, and the deep organizational psychology of high performance. It's essentially a collision of enterprise IT architecture and human behavioral frameworks.
It really is.
I will be representing the perspective that agentic identity and access management, what we call agentic IAM, and continuous autonomous technological adaptation is the only scalable path to survival. The math has simply surpassed human capacity.
And I will be representing the contrasting perspective that identity debt is fundamentally a human failure. It is driven by an addiction to comfort and a refusal to let go of legacy systems. We cannot solve a profound failure of human leadership by simply automating our blind spots.
Well, let me lay out the reality of where we are right now. Static, rule-based identity and access management is completely obsolete. We used to live in a world where an IT administrator would define your role, assign you a set of permissions, and maybe review that access once a quarter.
If you were lucky.
Right, if you were lucky. But look at the architecture of modern applications as detailed in recent Auth0 and Login Radius blueprints. We aren't just managing human employees anymore. Non-human identities, so service accounts, API keys, and especially AI agents, they now vastly outnumber human users.
Yeah, the sheer volume is wild.
It is. And these AI agents don't just generate text. They execute actions. They authenticate into databases. They call application programming interfaces, and they modify data autonomously. The only way to manage the massive technical debt found in legacy systems or in incredibly fast-moving cloud environments is through agentic IA. We must shift to systems that continuously evaluate trust based on real-time behavior.
I hear that, but I come at it from a different way. That technological sprawl you were describing, the millions of non-human identities, is merely a symptom. The disease is human. We accrue identity debt because organizations and their leaders refuse to let go of old versions of themselves.
How so?
Well, in the coaching philosophy of Michael Serwa and frameworks like Dan Kaufman's Stage Audit, we see that leaders frequently treat chaos and constant movement as progress. They completely fail to do the emotional work of subtraction. If we rely purely on autonomous systems to clean up this mess, we are just putting a faster engine on a broken car.
I see.
We risk building what sociologists call digital iron cages of continuous surveillance, rather than addressing the root cause of our disorganized, reckless expansion.
I hear your point about organizational psychology, but I think you are underestimating the raw, mechanical reality of this expansion. When we talk about the sprawl of credentials, I see a math problem that has scaled entirely beyond human comprehension. Take the research from Beyond Trust and Naveen Kotakondola regarding privilege escalation in Kubernetes environments.
Right, the ephemeral workloads.
Exactly. For those unfamiliar, we are talking about a physical server sitting in a closet for 10 years. We are talking about ephemeral workloads, essentially miniature virtual computers that spin up in the cloud, execute a single task, like processing a customer's payment, and then destroy themselves a millisecond later.
And the problem is what gets left behind in that millisecond?
Yes, the AI agents orchestrating these rapid-fire tasks are generating access keys, but they often leave behind shared static secrets. They literally forget to delete the key after the door is closed. The traditional VPN, where you log in once and are trusted for the whole day, is dead.
Totally dead.
We are looking at environments where millions of machine identities are making access requests every single second. The sheer volume of these connection points makes manual human governance a literal impossibility. You cannot hire enough security analysts on planet Earth to review permissions at the speed of cloud compute.
I agree that the sheer volume of transactions is staggering, but why is that math problem so severe in the first place? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is a direct result of board-driven security risks and human psychology prioritizing speed over structure.
You mean like rush deployments?
Exactly. Let's look at the Manage Engine analysis of Active Directory technical debt. They highlight organizations that undergo rapid mergers and acquisitions. The board mandates a lift-and-shift approach. They want the newly acquired company integrated by the end of the financial quarter.
Because the market demands momentum.
Right, but look at the technical cost of that momentum. Instead of doing the hard work of properly integrating the two networks, the IT leadership builds what is called an insecure one-way forest trust.
Ouch. Yeah.
It's basically punched a hole in the wall between two office buildings and trusting that everyone who walks through is a good guy. They hard-code credentials. They grant developers excessive, God-level privileges just to avoid the friction of troubleshooting individual permissions. That is not a failure of technology. That is an addiction to momentum.
I mean, that's a fair criticism of legacy IT culture.
It is. As Michael Serwa points out, chaos is the addiction to movement, and comfort is the first corruption. The board wants the comfort of a completed merger without the friction of proper integration. If leaders don't perform the emotional work of subtraction, of actually shutting down the legacy protocols and doing the hard integration, the technology just scales their bad decisions.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how we actually handle that scale, regardless of how it was created. Think of agentic IAM not as a rigid rule enforcer, but as a biological immune system.
Okay, an immune system.
Yeah. Beyond Trust actually predicts the rise of biological computers in the near future. But even today, our networks need to act organically. An immune system doesn't wait for the brain to consciously review a quarterly health report to fight a virus. It detects behavioral anomalies at the cellular level in real time.
Right, it's autonomous.
Exactly. If ephemeral Kubernetes workloads are spinning up and dying in milliseconds, how can a human leader's conscious reflection, no matter how psychologically grounded they are, possibly intervene to stop a privilege escalation exploit in real time?
Well, it cannot stop the exploit in the millisecond. I absolutely concede that. But a psychologically grounded leader, one who honestly assesses what systems they need to subtract, prevents that vulnerable Kubernetes architecture from being deployed with hard-coded share of secrets in the very first place.
But
Let me just finish this thought. You are trying to build a faster AI-powered Roomba to clean up a house where the roof is completely collapsed. You are saying we have a massive bleeding wound of non-human identities, so we need a faster, autonomous bandage. I am saying we need to stop playing in the debris. We need to fix the roof. When we defer entirely to the machine to manage the mess we created out of corporate greed or desire for speed, we abstract away human accountability.
But that abstraction is exactly what allows us to function securely and efficiently. I want to break down how this actually works because it directly addresses the ethical implications you're hinting at. I champion the shift from rule-based to self-learning systems, exactly as Gagan Mather outlines with autonomous IAM.
The knowledge graphs.
Yes, Agentic IAM uses what are called knowledge graphs to map behavior. Instead of just checking a static list that says, does user X have password Y? It builds a multidimensional map. It links your device, your typical typing speed, the geographical location you usually log in from, and the specific sequence of databases you usually pull from.
Which requires constantly watching everything the user does?
It requires context, yes, but it uses that context to drastically reduce false positives. It doesn't just ask, are you allowed in? It asks, should we still trust you right now in this specific context? It actually empowers users by making security invisible.
Invisible?
Yeah, you don't have to constantly authenticate with a token every time you open a new tab. Friction is only targeted when the behavioral map shows a severe anomaly. It frees human analysts from decision overload so they can focus on strategic, judgment-based work.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. What you call invisible security, I call a dystopian surveillance state. Let's apply Linda Coco's framework here. She examined how the FICO score created the modern American financial identity.
Okay.
It took a complex human life, their struggles, their class context, and reduced it to a 3-digit algorithmic number that dictates their survival, their ability to get a mortgage, a job, or even basic utilities. It creates what she calls the habitus of the debtor.
Meaning the individual internalizes the debt?
Exactly. The individual internalizes this external surveillance and begins to police their own behavior based entirely on how an opaque algorithm might score them. They blame themselves for systemic failures. They become trapped in what the sociologist Max Weber called the iron cage of disciplinary rationalism.
That's a strong comparison.
It's what's happening. Agentic IM is proposing to do the exact same thing to our digital professional lives. When an AI agent is continuously judging your typing speed and your behavioral patterns to decide your trustworthiness minute by minute, it creates a panopticon. Beyond Trust even predicts the rise of AI veganism, a massive ethical backlash where human beings will demand the right to opt out of continuous algorithmic judgment.
That is a compelling, provocative comparison, but the underlying mechanism is fundamentally different. A FICO score is a historical aggregate used to determine future financial risk, and it carries immense societal baggage. Agentic IM is evaluating real-time contextual alignment for the purpose of network defense.
But the effect on the human is the same.
Not really, because it is not judging your moral worth or your financial responsibility. It is simply verifying that the API call originating from your laptop matches the expected sequence of the software you are using. Furthermore, when Author Zero outlines their blueprint for AI agents, they emphasize giving these agents a first-class identity.
What does a first-class identity practically mean in this context?
It means strictly separating the AI agent's identity from the human user's identity. If I have an AI assistant that schedules my meetings and pulls data from me, it operates under its own distinct credential. So when the self-learning knowledge graph detects that my AI assistant is suddenly trying to download the entire HR database and anomalous behavior, it revokes the agent's access instantly.
Right.
But it does not lock me, the human, out of my email. It protects the human's digital livelihood by isolating and punishing the machine's actions, not the person.
But that separation is a theoretical ideal drawn up on a whiteboard. In practice, the lines blur incredibly fast. When a self-learning system decides a human user's behavioral pattern is anomalous and revokes their access to corporate infrastructure, aren't we just building a more efficient iron cage?
I wouldn't call it an iron cage.
We are replacing human due process with algorithmic bias. If a remote worker is locked out of their livelihood because a knowledge graph flagged their internet connection routing or their shift in working hours as anomalous, the burden of proof falls entirely on the human. They have to beg the IT help desk, which is likely also automated, to give them their identity back.
That is a risk, yes.
That is the ultimate realization of the habitus of the debtor. We become subservient to the digital architecture, constantly trying to prove to a machine that we are who we say we are.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently.
The alternative to continuous evaluation is static trust, which is infinitely more dangerous to that very same worker.
How so?
If we rely on a static password, and that password is stolen by a ransomware gang, the attacker has the keys to the kingdom. The company goes bankrupt, and that worker loses their job anyway. The iron cage of agentic IM, as you call it, is actually a highly adaptive protective perimeter that keeps the attacker out while keeping the legitimate user safe.
Assuming the algorithm gets it right.
Right, but I want to ground our debate in the reality of the boardroom. We can argue philosophy, but how do we actually implement these solutions? We have a highly skeptical, budget-conscious audience of decision makers, chief information security officers, and boards of directors who view identity management purely as a cost center.
Yes, the executives who are hoarding those 50 pounds of jagged keys because it makes them feel secure. How do you convince them to change?
Precisely. For that hard-to-convince C-suite, Peter Hill's concept of the governance intelligence layer is vital. You have to understand that boards will almost never approve the budget for a 24-month full IGA deployment.
Because IGA, Identity Governance and Administration, is notoriously painful to deploy.
Exactly. It requires ripping up the floorboards of the company's IT infrastructure, it's too expensive, and it takes too long to show a return on investment.
But if they do nothing, they face massive liabilities.
Right. Staying on a lightweight or legacy system leaves them exposed to catastrophic regulatory fines. We are talking about regulations like DORA and NIS2 in Europe, which will fine organizations a massive percentage of their global revenue if their digital resilience isn't up to standard. So the argument that actually wins over a stubborn board is the concept of the digital twin.
Okay, explaining the risk without demanding a full migration.
Exactly. Instead of ripping out their existing systems, you deploy an observability layer over the top of it. This layer uses those knowledge graphs we discussed to map every single relationship and access point in real time. It proves ROI immediately by exposing identity drift, where users slowly accumulate access they don't need, and segregation of duties violations.
So it's a visualization tool.
It is. You show the board a real-time, undeniable map of their own vulnerability without asking them to endure a 2-year IT migration. Data is what changes their minds.
I have to strongly disagree there. Data is necessary? Absolutely. But data alone rarely changes deeply entrenched human behavior. To truly convince a stubborn executive, you cannot just show them a dashboard. You must address their psychological identity debt.
How do you do that in a boardroom setting?
This is where you have to use Dan Kaufman's stage audit. You have to sit across from a CEO or a CISO, look them in the eye, and show them that they are acting like a stage 2 manager pretending to be a stage 3 leader.
Oh, wow. Break that down for us. What is the functional difference between those stages in this context?
The stage 2 manager derives their entire professional identity from being the hero. They micromanage, they hoard access to servers, they hoard direct reports, and they refuse to shut down legacy systems because keeping their hands on the levers makes them feel indispensable. When the network breaks, they want to be the one to rush in and put out the fire.
Right. The classic firefighter mentality in IT.
Exactly. A stage 3 leader, on the other hand, builds systems that don't catch fire in the first place. They delegate, and more importantly, they subtract. The problem is, graduating from stage 2 to stage 3 requires a massive ego death.
Because they lose that hero status?
Yes, if you automate identity governance, the stage 2 manager isn't the hero anymore. So subconsciously, they block the budget for Agent IAM. They keep the messy Active Directory trust alive because their psychological comfort literally translates into technical vulnerabilities.
So how do you frame that conversation so an executive actually listens instead of just getting defensive and throwing you out of the boardroom?
You present subtraction as a strategy for growth, not loss of power. You show them that letting go of dormant accounts, severing those outdated NTLM authentication protocols, and automating out the obsolete, chaotic versions of their company is a graduation.
That's a really powerful reframe.
It is. Michael Serwa says that success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose. Their past success creates comfort, and comfort replaces curiosity. You have to guide them to do the emotional work of grieving the leader they used to be, the one who needed to manually approve every single server configuration.
and embrace the leader they need to become.
Exactly. When they finally let go of those old keys, they gain the operational peace and the infrastructure actually needed to scale the business. You convince the board not just by showing them a digital twin of their network, but by holding up a mirror to their leadership psychology.
I think this is where our perspectives actually converge beautifully, especially for that tough C-suite audience. If we want to move a board of directors who are paralyzed by identity debt, we have to synthesize these approaches. We must combine the unarguable, real-time mathematical data of the governance intelligence layer with the undeniable psychological relief of strategic subtraction.
I completely agree with that synthesis. The technological intelligence layer provides the exact coordinates of the friction. It shows you the map of the mess. But the psychological framework provides the human courage required to actually press the delete button.
Exactly. And when you present it as a unified front, identity security fundamentally transforms in the eyes of the business. It is no longer just an IT tax. It's not just a compliance burden you suffer through to avoid a NIS2 fine. It becomes a massive competitive advantage.
A business enabler.
Exactly. A driver of enterprise agility. You are effectively telling the board, we are going to trim the dead weight from our digital infrastructure, and in doing so, we are going to make our organization move twice as fast with half the operational risk.
And that is a message that resonates because it speaks to both the corporate balance sheet and the executive ego. But it absolutely requires acknowledging the human and ethical dimensions of what we are building. If we just blindly deploy agentic AI to clean up the network without demanding a culture change from the leadership, we are just building faster, more opaque systems to scale our own confusion.
Fair point.
We have to actively escape that habitus of the debtor. We have to stop accepting that being overwhelmed by technical debt and holding on to 50 pounds of keys is just a natural state of corporate existence.
To summarize my position in light of this exchange, I maintain that the sheer mechanical scale of modern digital ecosystems makes traditional approaches impossible. The explosion of machine identities, ephemeral Kubernetes clusters, and autonomous AI agents means that static, rule-based systems are entirely obsolete. We must rely on autonomous IAM, knowledge graphs, and continuous trust evaluation to survive the volume and velocity of modern cyber threats.
Right. However, I readily acknowledge your point that deploying these systems without human accountability risks creating a frictionless environment where bad leadership can hide. The technology must serve a clear subtractive strategy, not act as a band-aid for hoarding behavior. And I maintain that identity debt is, at its absolute core, a human failure of attachment. It is the refusal of leaders to subtract what no longer serves the organization. While I concede that the mathematical scale of non-human identities requires intelligent automation and AI, I remain deeply cautious of the ethical consequences.
The iron cage.
Yes. If we allow algorithmic systems to continuously judge and revoke access without human transparency and due process, we are building an iron cage that will inevitably trap legitimate users in a cycle of algorithmic bias. True security requires the discipline to design clean, intentional architectures from the start, rather than relying on an AI immune system to constantly police our bad habits.
Well, I think we both agree, fundamentally, that the status quo cannot hold. Static systems, whether they are outdated software protocols passing plain text passwords or stubborn micromanaging leaders refusing to delegate, are simply incompatible with the age of agentic AI.
Definitely. Looking at identity debt through both a highly technical lens and a deeply human lens is the only way to grasp its full weight. It is not just a math problem about managing non-human privilege sprawl. It is about doing the difficult emotional work of subtraction, so we can actually build something resilient.
The true test of the next decade will be whether we can build high-resilience identities capable of continuous refinement. We have to be willing to look down at our key rings, identify the keys that belong to doors that no longer exist, and have the courage to throw them away.
Because the weight of the past is the only thing preventing us from moving securely into the future.
There is so much more to explore in this material, and as always, we leave it to you, the listener, to form your own conclusion. Until next time.
That wraps up today's journey. Thanks to my friends for sharing their thoughts, and to you for being part of this circle. Remember, inspiration isn't found once, it's built every day in small choices. If this talk spoke to you, Share it, follow along, and let's keep the conversation alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.